Oh, thank you so much for joining us at Are You Ready for a Low Cookie Diet? We're going to go ahead and get started. There's a lot in this presentation. We don't want to have to rush too quickly. So there are three of us here today. Myself, Jason Griffey, Director of Strategic Initiatives at NISO. We have Amanda Ferrante, Principal Product Manager, Identity and Access Management at EBSCO, and Athena Hoeppner, Discovery Services Librarian at the University of Central Florida. We are going to be doing a handful of things today and talking about browsers, browser changes, and how these privacy-protecting browser changes are going to affect a lot of things in our world, but primarily authentication and authorization issues. So we're going to talk, I'm going to talk through sort of the key privacy features that are being rolled out, what's changing, how quickly those things are changing, what it is you can look for on that front, how the web experience is going to change for your patrons, and then we're going to let Amanda and Athena talk through some of how specific library issues are going to arise, both from the vendor and from the library side, about these changes. So first up, a question. Actually, that's a statement. There's no question mark. I'm not crazy. Non-transparent, uncontrollable tracking of users across the web needs to be addressed and prevented. How many people think that's, yes, we agree with that? We should not track people. Yeah, that's great. That is absolutely the case. Libraries believe that very strongly. But browser vendors are not necessarily driven by our desires. They are driven by the consumer web. And more and more frequently, they are actually being driven by regulation and privacy regulations, both in Europe and even here in the US with things like the California Privacy Protection Act. As a result of these sort of regulatory changes, browser vendors are being driven very quickly, right? These regulations give them timelines that they have to meet in order to be legal and able to operate and avoid fines and all of those things. And so they are making changes to browser technologies that change the way information is dealt with inside the browser. And they will break things if they have to in order to meet these deadlines, in order to avoid being regulated by a government. So that is effectively what we're going to talk about today, is what is changing, what are these regulations driving, and then how does that affect us? Lots and lots of library applications and services work via a browser, right? We are living in a browser every day for lots of our work. And a lot of the things that we are doing in a browser to the browser use the same features that ad companies use to track people across the net and deliver them advertisements. And so the result is, as privacy controls get cranked up by the browser vendors and begin to prevent these tracking mechanisms from tracking people across the web and advertising to them, it also prevents the things that we sometimes do with our browsers in order to provide authentication services, in order to customize experiences for patrons and things like that. So let's do a very quick 101 about browsers. And when I talk about browsers and when I'm sort of talking through the next several slides relating to tracking, what am I talking about? So there are browsers. Everyone in here is familiar with Chrome. You probably know Edge. You may or may not know Brave. You probably know Safari and Firefox. Underneath those is a rendering engine, a sort of browser engine that drives the technology underneath the browser that sort of makes the browser able to do what it does. Chrome, Edge, and Brave all use the same one, Blink or Chromium. So any changes to Chrome also at some point are going to filter over into Edge and Brave as the Chromium underneath it is updated. Safari and WebKit. Anytime Apple changes something in WebKit, it changes Safari on iOS, it changes on the iPhone, it changes on the iPad, it changes on Mac OS. It also changes on every other browser on the iPhone, because every browser, even Chrome on the iPhone, uses WebKit because that's what Apple wants. So it is a confusing sort of world that we live in. And then Firefox, Mozilla has their own rendering engine, an open source one called Gecko. what is it that they're changing? Like, what are these all of these browsers are in the process of changing certain aspects of their privacy stack, sort of way they interact with information in themselves. There are 4 things that I'm going to talk very, very briefly about as I run through this. Third-party cookies, IP addresses, browser fingerprinting, and link decoration. All 4 of these things are being changed by the browser vendors over the course of the next several years. Cookies, everyone is probably familiar with this, right? A cookie is just a little piece of information that is resident in the browser. When the browser connects to a server, the server puts that information into the browser, it remains there, and then gets called in order to remember something, whether it's that you logged in, or whether that's that you like your background to be dark mode, or whether that, whatever the little piece of information the browser needs to remember, many times that is remembered through a cookie. First-party cookies, everyone is pretty comfortable with on the browser side, privacy side. That is accessible only by the domain that set it. So I visit CNN.com and I'm logged into CNN, and CNN sets a cookie that says, hey, look, Jason logged in. No other site can access that, only CNN can. That's a first-party cookie. A third-party cookie is one that is set and then used from domain to domain to domain. Other sites can read it. And that is the methodology by which you're often tracked via ad companies, right? That's the thing that we want to prevent happening. IP addresses, again, we're all familiar with this. Your machine has an IP address when it is on the web. Many, many, many library services use IP ranges as an authentication mechanism in order to, you have whitelists, you have allow lists of IP addresses that automatically allow something into a service. IP addresses, however, are a method of tracking a user across the web as well, and these are being obfuscated in the browser over the course of the next several years. There are a couple of different ways that's happening, but those are unimportant. Browser fingerprinting, another way that you get tracked. Everything about your browser is, not everything, many things about your browser are accessible to the server in question. When you hit it, you go to a web service. The web service can ask your browser, hey, what fonts does this person have installed? Hey, what extensions are they using? What am I allowed to see or not see in their browser? And all of those settings put together creates a pretty unique fingerprint. You only need a couple of those things in order to sort of track you across the web. So there are things being done at the browser level in order to prevent that from happening. And then finally, link decoration. And everyone who uses Facebook is familiar with these sorts of URLs. This example is from an ALA site. But this is, a link decoration is just a little bit of information added to a URL that is resident as you move through a site that is used to sort of, track you back to an origination like Facebook, right? It pings Facebook as you move around. So link decoration is also something that browser vendors are in the process of disallowing. So it's, we have a lot of interest in authentication, and a lot of the conversation that we're going to have here in a few minutes is about authentication, but it is more than just access and authentication. It's user preferences, it's session information, it's read later lists, it's, all sorts of, it's collecting demographic information that you yourself might want to use. It's all sorts of things that are going to start being much more difficult to do inside of a browser. So when and what exactly are people doing? There's a lot of different timelines. Some of them are clear, most of them are not. Apple is being fairly aggressive in beginning down this road. They actually started blocking third-party cookies way back in specific instances in what they call intelligent tracking protection. Safari 17, which I think is the most current version, they're beginning to remove link decoration trackers if you are in private browsing mode. This sort of, they're beginning to be extra careful about privacy if you are in certain modes or if you opt into things, is how all of the browser vendors are sort of slowly rolling this stuff out. So if you are in Safari 17 and you are in private browsing mode, they are using allow lists and disallow lists to remove link decoration trackers from certain sites that you may visit. Mozilla, beginning last year, started blocking third-party cookies as a part of their total cookie protection process. And Google has an extensive privacysandbox.com website that outlines a huge timeline for all of the changes that they're making. They are beginning now, in the fourth quarter of this year, to begin rolling out third-party cookie deprecation. So if you look at this timeline, you can see sort of Q4 2023 is when they are beginning sort of opt-in testing. They're allowing people to opt into it, and beginning in Q1 of 2024 on their timeline is what they call 1% third-party cookie deprecation, which is they're just going to allow 1% of Chrome installations to not use third-party cookies. Whether they're going to let people opt into that, how they're going to warn people about that, they have not said. They just said that they are going to be testing 1% of Chrome installations for third-party cookie deprecation. Chrome is the most popular browser in the entire world still. 1% of that is many, 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 many millions of people. So, IP protection, Chrome is also being extremely aggressive about this. They are beginning a timeline now. They have not given firm timelines about when they are or are going to be, when they are or are not going to be deprecating sort of IP transmission. They're gonna protect IP addresses and not allow them to be given to servers. All they have said is IP protection will not launch as a default setting before 2024. Okay, so sometime after that, I suppose. So maybe as a default setting in 2024. They have not said, but this certainly indicates that they're planning on something in 2024 for this work. And even surprising, they start doing things that we did not know about. So this is a screenshot from the Chrome//flags. If you are running the most current version of Chrome, release 1.18, so if you've updated your Chrome since October the 10th, I think, was when this particular release happened, they changed over there where it says default experimental third-party storage partitioning. The default used to be allow, the default is now disallow. They didn't warn anyone about this that I could find. We've certainly looked with the Seamless Access project at when this was announced. It caught us by surprise. So they are beginning to deprecate third-party storage in their storage partitioning inside the browser in Chrome. And this is a lot of words, I'm not gonna read it all. I work with the Seamless Access project. Many of you are probably familiar with this. This caught us by surprise because it actually changes the way our service works, and how it changes it maybe in one of these three ways. We don't have a way to predict it because we don't know how your browser is set up. And so these changes are going to, as they roll out across both, cookies, IP, link decoration, as these begin to be removed from browsers, how that looks to the user is going to be odd. It is just going to look broken, and we are going to have to figure out what it is that is sort of underneath the issue. So what's going on right now is that at least Seamless Access and a number of other library vendors are working hard with the browser creators to try to get them to understand our use cases and to try and get them to make changes that respect sort of not breaking everything we do. They are not always as receptive as we would like to this. We are, as you may imagine, a very small piece of anything they care about. They are mostly concerned about the consumer web, and research and scholarship is not necessarily at the top of their list. But there are things like this W3C community group, the Federated Identity community group, which is available. You can go online and take a look at all of the conversations that are going in there. That has representation from a number of library spaces, vendor and publisher space people are in this. So we do have an ear with all these changes. I don't know how much effect we're going to be having, but these are coming and they're not going to stop. So here are like a very quick list of things that are going to sort of, you should remember. SAML is going to continue to work. So federated authentication is going to continue to work for at least the next several years, except certain pieces of it, like globally logging out because of the cookie stuff. WAIF IDP discovery services will continue to work, except sometimes in certain circumstances, previous organizations might not be saved. Services that share information between third parties in frames. So if you have a website that uses frames in order to share information, Teams, lots of LMSs, lots of ILSs, these are going to break in weird and unusual ways. Other features that enable tracking, like IP addresses, and browser fingerprinting is already breaking depending upon the browser that you're using. And waifless linking, link decoration may or may not work. A lot of library services use it. We have not heard directly from the browser vendors exactly how they are implementing this. If they are implementing allow lists or disallow lists, that's one thing. If they're using some sort of machine learning algorithm to try and ID suspicious link decorations, we could get caught in that web pretty easily. So we just don't know. We just don't know how that's going to work out. And that is all of me. So now that I've scared you, I'm going to let these two explain to you how it's not all hopeless.
Hello, everyone. So that was a lot of information, and if any of you are hearing this for the very first time, then you're probably asking yourself the same thing I asked myself when I first learned about this, which is, what does this all mean? What are the implications? So what I'm going to go through today very briefly for you is actually a little bit of background, I guess a mini case study, if you will, of how EBSCO as an organization sort of moved toward understanding what this meant for our product and for our customers and what we did, what action we took. And it's not meant to be prescriptive necessarily, but it's meant to share sort of a model of how we move forward with it in case there are any vendors or libraries in the room that manage a platform that relies on these mechanisms and are thinking about how to move forward with all of this. So one of the first things we did was a little philosophical. We thought a little bit about our mission. And at the most boiled down level, EBSCO's mission is to deliver researchers to valuable information and research functionality in our platform. And the technology is how we do that. And the technology, in many cases, will rely on cookies of several varieties, on URL query parameters that could be misconstrued as link decoration used for tracking, and of course, on authentication. So I'm going to take you step by step through sort of our thought process at EBSCO, how we sort of took this through a very actionable, manageable, chunked up workflow, if you will. So the first was, do we use any of these things? And the resounding answer was yes. So we have a few examples. This is probably very common across the web in both vendor platforms and web platforms used by libraries. As Jason mentioned, sometimes third-party cookies are used to make logins easier by remembering your prior institutional choice. Third-party cookies are used for a lot of other things in software as well. Link decoration can take many forms. Open URL linking, for example, is critically important to researcher access to information and research. Are those query parameters going to start being construed by these browser vendors as link decoration? And IP addresses, beyond SAML SSO, which will see its own implications, IP addresses are used by a vast majority of libraries to support access to licensed content and platforms right now. So it's of great concern to the community that there is possible impact there. So once we identified, yes, there's probably an impact to our platform, I needed help. So step 1.5, before you can get to step 2, you need to identify your stakeholders. I work in authentication, so I can name a few off the top of my head, a few potential implications that I think we should take action to protect usage against. But there's a lot more to a vendor platform than just authentication. So I pulled in product managers, domain owners, technical SMEs who own our user interfaces, specific functionality, our API integrations, and so on. I pulled in our enterprise architects. Many vendors probably have these. These are the people who look down from 10,000 feet and see how all of the parts of your web platform fit together. And they are critical to understand how a change or an impact to authentication might impact the UI functionality over here in ways that I might not be aware of. And finally, very important stakeholder in all of this are all of our customer-facing teams. They understand how our customers use our platform, whether as intended, as built, or leveraging it in a way that we might not be aware of. So once we got our stakeholders together and got everybody agreed that yes, we should investigate this, which in and of itself can be a challenge for some organizations, and I know Athena will talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes, we wanted to test. If we were concerned about something, we needed to be able to confirm that it should be a concern or that we can debunk it. In other words, if we're going to freak out, just how much do we need to freak out, and do we need to freak out at all? So it was really helpful to know that Apple Safari had already rolled out a lot of these features if you're using Private Relay in their browser. So we were able to test things like proxy IP authentication versus on-site IP and begin to debunk and really focus on the things that we knew would be impacted. Once we had that list of things we knew would be impacted, we wanted to better understand the scope of impact. If you're a product manager or you work within a vendor platform, you probably do this often, where you receive enhancement requests, something breaks, you have a defect, and you really need to understand how many libraries is it impacting, how is the impact manifesting, is it a complete outage versus a button that should be blue instead of green, is it going to be something that we need to fix yesterday? So we tried to really go about this systematically for all of the impacts that we were anticipating coming out of these browser changes to understand if product development is needed, are we fitting that in soon enough amongst our other planned development work? Can we afford to wait? What's the risk? Is there an opportunity to go faster? And finally, with all of that sort of under our belts and understanding of how many libraries would be impacted and trying to understand when they would be impacted, we needed to really define what our plan of action was, whether that was actual development, and in some cases that is very possible for us, or if it is just communication and support. So I'm going to very quickly go through all of these steps using a specific browser change that is coming to show you how this actually manifested in EBSCO's workflow. So I want to talk a little bit about the Hide My IP feature. Google just recently started referring to it as IP protection. It is a feature that will hide the user's IP wherever they are actually physically located, their device. So we wanted to know, will this impact us? Can we draw a parallel between this feature and anything that we need to support? So I pulled in people who could help me answer that question. I think I know enough about library authentication to be able to test and say whether this feature will impact your patrons' access to a product, but I needed our architects and our domain experts and our engineers to tell me if there was anything else happening behind the scenes in our product that required recognition of an IP address. And then we tested, and we found out very quickly that Hide My IP, when enabled in Safari using Private Relay, disables, completely makes it unusable, any on-site IP access that your patrons might be using. So then we started talking about the scope of impact. For EBSCO, this is the scope of impact, really, really boiled down. And I imagine for many, many vendors and publishers who use IP authentication to allow researchers to get access, this is probably going to look pretty similar. A large majority of access to our platform uses on-site IP authentication, not proxied, on-site. And we know, just by looking at what is configured in EBSCO admin, our admin database, that 16% of our customers do not have any other authentication method configured. They only use on-site IP authentication. That helps us understand the scope of impact because that is the cohort of libraries who, if their users begin enabling this Hide My IP feature, will start to see a decline in usage. So a lot of questions came up as we talked about the scope of impact. Isn't Hide My IP already available to Safari users? Yes, but you need to use Private Relay to enable it, and Private Relay is only available to paid Apple customers. And besides that, 70% of all sessions in the EBSCO platform use Chrome today. And for other vendors, that may be much higher, depending on where your customers are located. Isn't Hide My IP an opt-in feature? Yes, but that is a little frightening in and of itself. If it's opt-in, that means we can't tell when users have turned it on. To a library looking at usage information, it may appear like there's simply declining usage over time, which you may interpret as declining interest or value of these products. But we will have no real way to observe that it is potentially because your patrons have hidden their IP address and are no longer successfully accessing when they're on campus or in your library. But as Jason mentioned, Google recently changed their tune with this. It will not launch as a default setting before 2024. That is a little frightening. So, just to sum up the scope of impact from our perspective, browser changes will begin to impact the reliability of on-site IP access. Many, many libraries, especially in certain markets and regions of the world, rely heavily or only on on-site IP. We know that consistently successful access to research relies on them having something else in place to fall back to when on-site IP fails. And we know that we won't be able to measure the impact, so it's important that we start taking action now. And finally, recent addition, we know that there's potential for default IP obfuscation to be rolled out at some point in the future. Let me just look at the time. I'm going to just sort of skip through these a little bit, very high summary, so I can hand it over to Athena and make sure she can provide her perspective. So what action did we take? We cannot necessarily identify and set up remote authentication for 16% of our customers, but we can form a working group internally to communicate with them at every level, and we have started to do that. So we have members from both internally facing technical teams and all of our externally facing library facing teams who are helping us get the message out there that IP access when users are on site may start to fail when Google rolls this out to their Chrome users, and that we want to share information, we want to share support with those libraries to help them take the steps to configure a remote authentication method. You can still use on-site IP for the majority of your usage, but if it fails, they need to fall back to something that will continue to enable successful access to the licensed content and products that you purchase. We are very transparent about what we still don't know, and at EBSCO we still don't know a lot, but that's why we rely on our partners in the community and all of the libraries and other vendors that we talk with. The information is coming in fits and starts. It sometimes feels like a black box, but over time, as long as we have an open discourse, we believe that we can approach this in a partnership. So my final slide is just sort of rehashing that image I had at the very beginning, but trying to make the point that we are all kind of in the same boat with this. It's not vendors only who may be impacted by this, but library platforms and a lot of your functionality relies on some of these functions as well. So we are very, very much in the same boat in terms of what steps we might want to take to start to mitigate impacts. And with that, I will hand it over to Athena.
Okay, these are two hard acts to follow. They are very knowledgeable and informative, and I feel like typically libraries, academic libraries, lag behind a little bit with what the technology and then what our vendors are doing, and I think that's the case here as well. But I am very concerned about authentication for our users, and that's really what I'm going to focus on today. I'm not going to get into the other features that are supported through the sorts of things that can be affected through these changes that Jason described. But looking at our authentication, what is at risk is our IP authentication, we know is going to be at risk, Easy Proxy, and Open Athens and Shibboleth. These are the things that we use at my university. There are certainly other types of authentication that I'm not going to talk about. So for IP authentication, this is a significant risk for us because we know that a lot of our researchers are on campus and they sit down at their computers without using a library link. There's no proxying, there's no Open Athens redirector in front of the link. They're just going straight to the source, whether it's a journal article link that someone has sent them or a Google search result. They're just going there without authenticating. And right now that works for on campus, and that if the IP is hidden from the vendor, will stop working. It won't look like a UCF user, and they won't get our subscribed access. As far as I know, there is no technical solution to this, which is a big concern. I don't have something I can do. other than communicate. And there's no way to effectively tell all of our users, we have 70,000 students and 4,000 faculty, how am I going to explain this to them? So we may need to be prepared with a lot of support. You know, people are going to say, I can't get to this article, what's wrong with your subscription? Well, you need to start with our link. And we know that users don't really like that. We can, of course, monitor the discussions and hope that something develops. And in fact, I have been looking around and scoping things out. As mentioned before, it's going to be opt-in initially. It will be rolled out in a phased manner, so maybe that won't affect our users really quickly. And this was interesting, I found on the IP protection phase 0 discussion from Google, and it said we are using a list-based approach and only domains on the list in third-party context will be impacted. So if that means they're looking at, well, these are the IPs, or I don't know exactly how this will work technically, but if they're saying these IPs typically would be associated with a problem and these ones not with a problem, maybe, I don't know how they're going to figure that out, but hopefully this is a good thing for us. I guess we'll find out as it rolls out. I remember I understood it more when I read it a few days ago. Okay, so Easy Proxy looks a little bit more promising. According to OCLC, there is no impact, and I don't trust that to remain true, but right now there seems to be no impact on Easy Proxy services. Third-party publishers will see the Easy Proxy IP address regardless of the browser IP address, which makes sense. It's sort of mediating in the interaction, and the IP that's broadcast is the one for the Easy Proxy server, not the browser. So their library response is to continue to monitor that, stay on top of things, but we don't need to really be concerned deeply right now. Open Athens and Shibboleth, it seems similar right now. No immediate threat, according to stay ahead of browser level privacy changes from the Open Athens blog. So that's great. So there will be another site that I looked at said the phasing out will mainly affect logout and WAF functionality. So there may be some user experience changes where people are having to log in more often than they used to, or if they log out, they're not logged out of everywhere. So that, I think, is not going to phase our users much. The new approach to end user privacy that browsers are proposing appears to have significant impact on RNE, I think I left out a no significant impact on RNE federated access practices, or maybe I didn't. I made these slides 2 days ago. You would think I would have these quotes still in my head. What? Oh, thank you. They look good, but so yeah, I think that we need to monitor this, but right now there's not an action that is obvious for libraries to take in response to the changes that will impact our Open Athens or Shibboleth-based authentication. So what should we do? We should communicate with our universities if we're using SAML-based authentication, which at University of Central Florida we are, not only for library access, but they use it for authenticating to a whole suite of services hosted at the university and other places. So we need to share this information with the teams that are managing those services at the campus and test if possible, or ask our IT teams to. And there's some more information about that in preparing for the end of third-party cookies from the Chrome developers. The Chrome developer site has a wealth of information. So similar to what Jason showed before, here's a testing flag that you can just paste into Chromium or Chrome, and it will bring up these tools that you can use to start testing and see what happens if third-party cookies are off and so forth. And I expect these tools will continue to evolve as the changes roll out. And also, you need to start a conversation locally, and this may or may not be easy, depending on what your relationship is with the identity management and related teams on your campus. So this is an email, and I don't expect you to be able to read it, that I sent. This is the second email I sent to our identity management team. The first one got no reply at all. So a few months later, I tried rephrasing it, and I put in a bunch of very specific questions. And again, I don't expect you to read all this. These aren't even necessarily the right questions, but it got the communication started. They did respond, and they gave this as the summary of the response. So SSO will continue to operate with third-party cookies blocked. No one person or office is going to be assigned to monitor this. They expect the people who are sort of more deeply involved in the services, like Open Athens in my case, to be on top of it and tell them what's going on. So that didn't really ease my mind. But Open Athens currently test is working okay, so they were happy with that. And maybe someone else knows more. Maybe, yeah, that'd be good. Yeah. So libraries are kind of in a trust fall situation. We can't really affect what's going on with the browsers. We can't really affect how our vendors respond. And we really rely on our campus IT to do a lot of the management of these systems at a very deep technical level. So communication and trust are really what we've got to rely on. If you do need to communicate with your IT team and you don't know how to start or who to contact, you can look. If you're a US institution, educational institution, you might be a member of INCOM, and it's pretty normal for US academics to be a member. And you can go to this URL and look up your institution and get the contact information, including the email addresses. So you can start there to make some contacts and send an email and get the conversation going. All right, back to Jason.
Sure. Two more quick things. So again, the places you can go to learn more, Federated Identity Community Group with the W3C. There's also a private advertising technology community group at the W3C. Where you can sort of see conversations that are happening. Refeds is also having conversations about this. I think that particular link is broken now, but I'll double check that. But I know that there are conversations going on inside there. And I would be remiss if I didn't point out that there's also a conference coming up, NISO Plus 2024, where we will continue this conversation specifically around the changes that are happening, and maybe we will know more by February. We will see. So now we have a few minutes for questions. Yeah, feel free. That should be a live mic, so.